She spent 3 years publishing brilliant essays under a fake name, because no one would print a woman's work. He spent 8 months writing letters to the most compelling mind he'd ever encountered, not knowing she was sitting across from him at dinner, being dismissed. When they find out, neither can pretend the other is who they thought. The carriage arrived at Fenwick Park in the kind of rain that had clearly been planning this for days. It came sideways, which Harriet considered a personal affront, and had thoroughly destroyed her hat by the time the footman reached the door with an umbrella that arrived approximately 4 seconds too late to be useful. She stepped out with her book tucked under one arm and her ruined hat under the other, and looked up at the house. Fenwick Park was the sort of estate that knew it was impressive and saw no need to labour the point. 3 stories of pale stone, symmetrical windows, an avenue of beeches that in any other weather would have been handsome. In this weather, they were skeletal and dripping. Harriet thought she liked them better for it. "How you're soaked," said Louisa Fenwick, appearing in the doorway with the particular energy of a woman who had been watching for the carriage for 20 minutes and wanted credit for her restraint in not running out to meet it. "Completely soaked. Is that your best hat?" "It was," Harriet said. Louisa seized her by the free arm and pulled her inside. She was small and fair and moved through rooms the way a sparrow moves through a garden, quickly, at angles, with apparent disregard for obstacles. She had married Mr. Fenwick 3 years ago, inherited this house along with him, and proceeded to fill both with an energy that the house had probably not experienced since its construction. "You must come and get dry immediately. Mrs. Holt will bring tea. The others arrived yesterday and the day before. We are 8 for dinner, which is exactly right, I think, though Mr. Stowe only arrived this morning, and I am not entirely sure we have his room properly aired." She stopped in the middle of the entrance hall and turned to look at Harriet fully. "You look well. You look tired. Which is it?" "Both," Harriet said. "Who is Mr. Stowe?" "George Stowe. He is a cousin of—" "Oh, but you will meet everyone at dinner. Go and change. Your room is the blue one, the one you had last time. I put fresh flowers in it, though I suspect they are now somewhat damp from the window I left open this morning." Harriet left her still talking and followed the housemaid upstairs. The blue room was as she remembered it: a wide bed, a writing desk positioned to catch the north light, a small shelf of books someone had left and no one had thought to remove. She set her own book on the desk, the Greek verse battered at the spine, its cover the colour of old moss, and changed out of her wet things while the fire was built up. From the window between the skeletal beeches, she could see the stable yard. A groom was leading in a very good horse. A man stood watching it go, hands clasped behind his back. He did not move until the horse had disappeared entirely. Harriet let the curtain fall and sat down at the desk. She had 3 weeks. De Vere had written in September to say he hoped to receive her next piece before the new year. That left 6 weeks, and 3 of them would be spent here. 3 weeks at Fenwick Park, with 8 people for dinner every night, was not ideal. But Louisa had asked 4 times, and Harriet's father had pointed out that she had not left the county since March, and here she was. She opened the Greek verse volume to her marked page and uncapped her pen. Dinner was at 7. Harriet arrived precisely on time, which meant she was the 3rd person in the drawing room and had 4 minutes to study the others before the full party assembled. Mr. Fenwick she knew, a steady, pleasant man of 40 who loved his land and his wife in that order and made no secret of either. He was talking to a gentleman she didn't recognize, middle 30s, unremarkable coat, an expression of mild goodwill. Then the door opened, and Sebastian Vane, Duke of Carwell, walked in. Harriet knew him by the room's reaction before she knew him by his face. It was not that people moved exactly, it was that they reorganized. Postures shifted, conversations paused mid-sentence and resumed at a slightly different pitch. He was tall, dark-haired, with a face that would have been handsome if it had shown any interest in being looked at. It didn't. His gaze moved across the room with the efficiency of a man cataloguing what he needed to know and filing away the rest. It reached Harriet, registered her, and moved on. She felt nothing in particular about this, which she noted. Louisa materialized at her elbow. "The Duke of Carwell," she said, in the tone of someone presenting an exhibit. "He arrived Tuesday. He is—" She lowered her voice to a register that was still entirely audible to anyone within 6 feet. "He is not precisely warm, but then neither is a January morning and one still goes outside." "An illuminating comparison," Harriet said. "I thought so. Come and let me introduce you." Harriet followed, because refusing would have required more energy than complying, and because she was curious, which she admitted to herself only partially. "Miss Calloway," Louisa said with the bright confidence of a woman who considered introductions a personal achievement, "may I present the Duke of Carwell? Your Grace, this is my dearest friend, Miss Harriet Calloway, who has come all the way from Shropshire to stay with us." Sebastian Vane turned to her, brown eyes, dark, precise, and an expression that she could only describe as neutral in the specific way that required effort. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Your Grace," she said. A beat. He inclined his head and returned his attention to Mr. Fenwick. Louisa, undeterred, was already moving toward the next introduction. Harriet took a glass of wine from the passing tray and went to examine a painting on the far wall that she had no interest in whatsoever. At dinner, she was placed 4 seats from him. She watched him when she could do so without being observed, and confirmed what the drawing-room had suggested. He spoke rarely, listened completely, and when he did offer a remark, it landed with the weight of something that had been considered before being released. The table deferred to him without quite knowing it was deferring. She found this irritating. She found him irritating. She returned to her mutton and her conversation with Mr. Fenwick's cousin on her left, who had an admirable collection of opinions about drainage and wanted to share all of them. She was in the library by 8:30 the next morning. It was the best room in the house. Harriet had established this on her first visit 2 years ago and saw no reason to revise the assessment. 3 walls of shelves, a pair of long windows facing east, a fireplace that drew well, and a writing table positioned so that whoever sat at it had their back to the door, which meant they heard arrivals but were not obliged to face them. Harriet sat at the writing table. Her Greek verse volume was open beside her notebook. She was working through the 3rd ode, and had reached a clause that resisted translation, not because it was obscure, but because it was doing 3 things at once, and English was not built for that kind of density. She was so absorbed that she heard the door and did not look up. Footsteps crossed the room, not tentative. Someone who had also decided this room was theirs this morning and had not yet discovered the error. The footsteps stopped, the sound of a book removed from a high shelf, then a voice. The Hartley translation is generally considered inadequate by anyone who has spent time with the original. He had not looked at her. He was examining the book's spine with the same expression he had given the dinner table last night, assessing, unhurried. Harriet set down her pen. "I am aware," she said. "Most readers are not." "I am not most readers," she paused. "I am also not reading the Hartley translation." He looked at her then, properly for the first time, not the cataloguing glance from the drawing-room, but something more direct. His gaze dropped briefly to the open volume on her desk, then to the notebook beside it, then returned to her face. "You are working from the Greek," he said. "I am." A silence. He looked at the book in his hand as if recalibrating something. "The 3rd ode?" "Yes." The subordinate clause in the 2nd stanza is a particular difficulty. Harriet felt the specific irritation of being surprised by someone she had decided not to be surprised by. "It is," she said after a moment. "It compounds." "It does." He crossed to the chair nearest the window, not the chair closest to her, not the chair furthest from her, but the one with the best light, and sat down with his book. "I won't disturb you." "You already have," Harriet said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. He opened his book. She looked at him for 1 more second, then turned back to the subordinate clause. Outside, the rain resumed. She forgot the book. Not the notebook. She carried that, but the Greek verse volume left on the arm of the chair nearest the fire. When Louisa appeared at the library door at 11 o'clock to announce that there was hot chocolate in the morning room and that Harriet had been hiding for 2.5 hours and enough was enough. Harriet had gone. The book stayed. She remembered it at luncheon, returned to the library directly after, and found it not on the chair but on the writing table, placed precisely in the center, cover up. Someone had moved it. Someone had presumably looked at it. She picked it up and checked her marked pages. All intact. She checked the margins. Her own notes were there, small and dense, in the hand she used when she was thinking rather than composing. Notes to herself, arguments half-formed, the occasional sharp word in Greek when a translation choice irritated her. On the page she had been working that morning, in the margin beside the compounding subordinate clause, there was a small mark she had not made. A single line, underscored. as if someone had found the same problem and wanted to note it. Harriet stared at it. Then she closed the book, tucked it under her arm and went upstairs to dress for the afternoon. The rain made the decision for them. By 2 o'clock it had settled into the kind of steady, purposeful downpour that cancelled the planned walk to the Folly and sent the house party indoors to redistribute itself among the available rooms. The drawing room absorbed most of them. The card table in the morning room took 3 more. Harriet went to the small sitting room off the east corridor, which had a decent fireplace and no card table, and was therefore unlikely to attract company. She settled into the window seat with her notebook and had been working for 20 minutes when the door opened. Sebastian Vane stopped when he saw her. A brief pause, 1 second, no more, and then he came in anyway, which she found either rude or refreshing and could not decide which. "There is a card game in progress in the morning room," she said. "I am aware," he said, and a great deal of conversation in the drawing room. Also aware. He took the chair by the fire, the same unerring selection of the best available position she had observed that morning, and opened his book. They worked in silence for a quarter of an hour. It was not the silence of 2 people ignoring each other. It was something else which Harriet declined to name but was aware of. George Stowe appeared in the doorway, took in the scene and retreated without a word. Harriet did not see this. Sebastian did. "You are translating," Sebastian said without looking up. "I am." "For what purpose?" She considered the question. For the purpose of understanding what was actually said, rather than what the existing translations claim was said. "They are not always the same thing." He looked up. "No," he said, "they are not." He returned to his book. "Which ode?" "The 5th now. I finished the 3rd this morning." "The 5th is less resistant." "It is more melancholy." A pause. "Yes," he said, "it is." She looked at him. He was reading, or appeared to be reading, and his expression had shifted from its usual precision to something she might, if pressed, have called attention. Not to the book. He was not looking at her either. He was somewhere between the two. "You read Greek," she said. "Adequately." "You had opinions about the Hartley translation this morning. Having opinions does not require fluency." "No," she agreed, "but yours was specific." He looked at her again. The brown eyes were, she noticed, not cold precisely, more like a temperature that had been selected rather than arrived at. "My tutor at Oxford was a man who considered imprecise translation a moral failing," he said. "Some of it took hold." "And the rest of it?" "The rest of it I've spent 15 years politely ignoring." He turned a page. "What college did your tutor attend?" The question landed with full awareness of what it implied, that she had not been to Oxford, could not have, and that he knew this and was asking anyway. She looked at him steadily. "He didn't. He was my father." "A clergyman?" "A scholar. There is a distinction." "There is," he said, and he said it without irony, which she had not expected. Outside the window the rain intensified briefly, drummed on the glass and eased. Neither of them remarked on it. George Stowe had ridden to the post town that morning. Harriet learned this at luncheon, not from George himself, who had returned by noon and said nothing of his errand, but from Louisa, who mentioned it while explaining why the 4th place on the left side of the table was briefly empty. "He rode out at first light," Louisa said, with the mild satisfaction of a woman who tracked the movements of her household accurately, if not always usefully. "Some correspondence forwarded up from London, I believe. He is back now." George was indeed back, seated beside Sebastian at the far end of the table, a damp leather satchel deposited somewhere out of sight, his greatcoat presumably with the servants. He had the particular expression of a man who had carried information a long way and had not yet decided how to put it down. Harriet was 3 places from him, between Mr. Fenwick and the mild-mannered gentleman from the drawing-room, whose name turned out to be Mr. Aldrich, and whose opinions on drainage had, it emerged, not been exhausted the previous evening. She was not attending to Sebastian's end of the table. She was not attempting to. But the room was not large and voices carried, and she heard George Stowe say, in the careful tone of a man choosing words, "Hartley's man forwarded it with the Morning Post, the list and the particulars, and then, after a pause, he considers the matter rather pressing." Sebastian said something she did not catch. George said, "Your mother's view is known. Alderton's daughter is the preference if it can be arranged before the session." Another pause. Then Sebastian, level as a ruled line, "It can't." "Carwell." "Not at the table, George." Silence at that end. Mr. Aldrich had moved from drainage to crop rotation and required responses. Harriet gave them. She did not look down the table again. She understood with clarity that required no assistance what had been discussed. The approved list. The pressing matter. Alderton's daughter, whoever she was, preferred by Sebastian's mother, required before the parliamentary session. She picked up her fork and finished her luncheon. That evening in her room, she took out the letter she had been composing to S. Vale, her correspondent, her critic, her most honest reader, whose identity she had never sought and did not need, and wrote for an hour without stopping. "I find myself in the particular predicament," she wrote, "of being discussed in the same room as a man who does not know he is discussing me, not by name, I am not quite real enough for that, but as a category, the category of women present who are not and cannot be and need not be considered. I confess to you that I do not find this surprising. I find it clarifying. There is a relief, perhaps, in confirmation." She stopped, read it back, crossed out the last two sentences and wrote instead, "I find it useful to know where one stands, even when the ground is cold." She sealed it in the morning. Sebastian wrote to H. Calloway that same night. He sat at the small desk in his room with the fire low and George's silence. George had said nothing after dinner, which was its own form of commentary, somewhere down the corridor, and he wrote, "I have met at the house where I am presently staying a woman of considerable intelligence who appears to have decided, on very little evidence, that I am not worth her attention. I find I cannot determine whether she is correct. She reads Greek. She argues by implication rather than assertion, which is either very good training or very good instinct. She is not on any list I have been given." He stopped, read what he had written, added after a moment, "She is not, I think, anything like you, but she is the first person in some months who has made me want to continue a conversation rather than conclude it." He sealed the letter and set it aside for the morning post. He did not sleep particularly well. He asked for the book on a Tuesday. They had fallen over the course of the week into a pattern that neither had proposed and neither had commented on. The library in the mornings, the small sitting room when rain drove the party inside, which was often, a silence that had stopped being uncomfortable and become something closer to habitual, the silence of two people who did not need to fill space and had separately concluded this was unusual. He had read over her shoulder once, not intentionally. He had crossed behind her chair to reach the bookshelf and paused briefly at the Greek verse volume open on the table. She had been aware of him there for perhaps 3 seconds. He had moved on without comment. On Tuesday morning, she set the book on the table between them rather than keeping it at her elbow. He looked at it, then at her. "May I?" he said. "If you return it," she said. He picked it up with the particular care of a man who respected books as objects as well as texts. He turned to the front matter, examined the edition, turned to her marked pages. His face showed nothing, which she had come to understand did not mean nothing was there. "I'll have it back by Thursday," he said. "I'll need it Wednesday evening." "Wednesday evening," he agreed, and tucked it under his arm with his own book, which was the same volume of philosophy he had been carrying for a week and appeared to be reading at the rate of 1 page per hour. She watched him go and felt, precisely, the feeling of having handed something over that she had not meant to hand over. Not the book. Something the book contained. The house party gathered that afternoon in the drawing room, all 8 of them, which was unusual and entirely Louisa's doing. She had organized an informal debate on the subject of modern literature, which was really an excuse to get everyone in the same room, and had made the excellent tactical decision of providing very good wine alongside it. The debate was lively, which is to say that Mr. Aldrich had opinions, and Mr. Fenwick had opinions, and 2 of the other guests had opinions, and Louisa had so many opinions delivered in such rapid succession that the debate structure had largely collapsed within 20 minutes into a general conversation about reading, which was better anyway. Harriet had been speaking with one of the other guests, a Mrs. Poole visiting with her husband, who had read widely and thought precisely, when Louisa appeared at her shoulder with the abruptness of a woman following a thought before it escaped. "Harriet," she said, "you subscribe to the Review, don't you? The literary one, the quarterly? There was that essay last month, the one about classical translation and what we lose in the modern mode. Did you read it? I thought of you immediately when I read it. Or rather, I thought, Harriet would either love this or have written it herself." She laughed at her own joke and moved on to refill Mr. Aldrich's glass without waiting for an answer. Harriet held very still. Across the room, Sebastian Vane set down his wineglass. He had not been part of the debate. He had occupied the chair nearest the fireplace, as he occupied most chairs, with the air of a man who had not planned to stay, but found himself remaining, and had listened more than he spoke, which in a room of 8 people meant he had listened a great deal. "The essay," he said into a brief gap in the general conversation, "is the most precise argument about the relationship between translation and interpretation that the journal has published in 3 years. The author understands something that most classicists resist, that fidelity to the text and fidelity to the meaning are not always the same obligation." The room gave this its attention. Mrs. Poole agreed. Mr. Fenwick said he had not read it, but would. 2 other voices joined. Harriet looked at her hands in her lap. She looked at the fireplace. She looked at the window. She did not look at Sebastian Vane. The conversation moved on. The wine was replenished. Louisa proposed that someone play the pianoforte and the question of who absorbed the room entirely. Harriet excused herself at 8:30 and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time and thought about a man who had read her work and admired it in the same sentence he had used to dismiss her. Not her. The woman in the drawing room whom he had catalogued and set aside. H. Calloway, the author, that he would follow anywhere. Harriet Calloway, the person, not on any list. She turned over and looked at the ceiling. It clarified something she had been reluctant to name. Not anger exactly. Something older and more specific. The exhaustion of being 2 people, and the knowledge that only one of them was allowed to matter. She went to the library late, past 10 when the house had settled, because she could not sleep and the notebook called and the fire in her room had gone low. He was already there. She stopped in the doorway. He was at the writing table, her writing table where she had been working all week, with the Greek verse volume open before him and a candle burning close. He had a pen in his hand. He looked up when she entered. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "I said Wednesday evening," she said. "It is Wednesday evening," he said. She crossed the room and held out her hand. He closed the book, paused, and placed it in her hand. Their fingers did not touch. She sat in the chair by the fire, the one that had become, by some unspoken agreement, hers, and opened the book. He had not disturbed her marked pages. He had not written in the margins beside her notes. He had turned instead to the 5th ode, the melancholy one, and on the wide margin of the left-hand page, beside the 3rd stanza, he had written 4 words in a small, controlled hand. "This one resists too." Harriet read it again. The 5th ode was not a translation problem. It was not obscure. It resisted because of what it said, not how it said it. A quiet argument about the distance between what we mean and what we are able to offer, written by a man dead for 2,000 years who had apparently understood the problem perfectly. She looked up. He was watching her read. "It does," she said. He nodded once. He picked up his philosophy volume and turned a page. She turned back to the 5th ode. The fire settled. The candle burned. Outside the window the rain had stopped at last, and the silence it left behind was complete. Neither of them left for another hour. The Morning Post arrived at Fenwick Park at 9:30. Harriet was at breakfast when the footman brought the letters in on a small silver tray and distributed them with the efficiency of a man who had learned not to linger. Mr. Fenwick received 2. Louisa received 1 and opened it before she had finished her toast. George Stowe received 1 and pocketed it without expression. Sebastian received 1. He looked at it, turned it over, and set it beside his coffee cup unopened. Harriet watched him do this and looked away. She had 1 of her own, from her father, she assumed, recognizing the hand, and opened it to find a short note inquiring after her health, reporting that the cat had destroyed the curtains in his study, and mentioning, with a casualness that did not fool her for a moment, that Mr. de Vere had written again to ask when her next piece might be expected. She folded the note, placed it in her pocket, and finished her coffee. By 11, the breakfast room had emptied. Louisa had organized a party to drive to the village, in the one carriage that the rain hadn't rendered an act of optimism. Mr. Fenwick had gone to the estate office. George Stowe was somewhere unaccounted for. Harriet went to the library. Sebastian was there before her. Not at the writing table, at the window, standing with his back to the room, his unopened letter now open in his hand. He turned when she came in. He did not put the letter away. "Miss Calloway," he said. "I can return later," she said. No. He looked at the letter in his hand, then at her, then at the room as if triangulating something. Stay. It was not a request exactly. It was not quite a command. It was the voice of a man who had decided something and not yet said what. She came in and went to her chair, the one by the fire, and sat down. She did not open her notebook. He remained standing. The letter in his hand, she saw now, bore a seal she recognized. Small, dark blue wax, the impression of a press she had seen before on the letters forwarded through her father's direction, the seal of De Vere and Marsh, publishers of the Quarterly Review. Her stomach performed a single, precise movement. He looked at the letter again. Then, with the deliberateness of a man who had decided to do something unusual and intended to do it fully, he read aloud. Dear S. Vale, I write to convey the enthusiastic reception of your most recent letter to this office regarding the work of H. Calloway, and to inform you that I have given the matter serious consideration. I should be glad to discuss it further at your earliest convenience. In the meantime, H. Calloway's latest piece, the translation of the Fifth Ode, accompanied by the critical essay, has been accepted for the March issue under the usual arrangement. We trust this finds you well. De Vere. He stopped reading. The room was very quiet. Harriet was aware with great precision of the fire to her left, the window behind him, the book on the table between them, her Greek verse volume, returned now, sitting where she had left it that morning. She was aware of her own hands, folded in her lap, which she did not move. Sebastian looked up from the letter. He looked at her face. She watched him arrive at it. Not a gradual realization, a single reorganizing moment. She saw it happen the way one sees a key turn in a lock, one state, then another, the mechanism completing itself between 1 second and the next. His eyes moved to the book on the table, to her hands, back to her face. The Fifth Ode, he said. Yes, she said. A silence. Not long. The length of time it takes two people to understand that everything they have said to each other in the past 10 days has had a second layer, and they have both been living in it without knowing. H. Calloway, he said. And you are S. Vale, she said. He sat down. Not in his usual chair, in the one nearest her, the one he had never used, the one that put him 6 feet away rather than 12. He set the letter on the table. He looked at it, rather than at her. 8 months, he said. 8 months, she agreed. She waited. She had learned in 10 days that he did not rush toward things. He came to them at his own pace, which was deliberate, and when he arrived he was completely there. I wrote to you, he said, that I had met someone here who made me want to continue a conversation. He paused. I meant you. Without knowing I meant you. I know, she said. I received the letter. She let that sit for a moment. I wrote to you that I had found it clarifying to know where one stands. I received that letter also. Then we are equally informed, she said, and equally foolish. He looked at her then. Something in his expression that was not quite wry and not quite pained, and was, she thought, probably the closest he came to either. You might have told me, he said. The mildness of it, the absolute restraint, was what got through. When, she said, when you told me the Hartley translation was considered inadequate, when you sat in this library for 10 days admiring my work in letters and giving me precisely nothing in person? She did not raise her voice. The sharpness was in the precision, not the volume. You admired H. Calloway's mind. You were perfectly correct to Harriet Calloway in every room of this house. Those are not the same thing, and you know it. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He said, I know. 2 words. Flat, direct, carrying the weight of a man who had already had this argument with himself and lost. I did not know they were the same person, he said. But you knew what you thought of her, Harriet said. Of women at such gatherings. That was your phrase in the letter you wrote in October. Women at such gatherings. Pleasant, decorative, easily summarised. You wrote that to me. I read it and thought, well, at least he is honest. I was not wrong about most of them, he said. You were wrong about me. Yes, he said, I was. The fire shifted. A log dropped and resettled. Neither of them moved. What does De Vere mean, Harriet said, by your advocacy? He looked at the letter. I wrote to him 3 weeks ago, before I came here. I told him that H. Calloway's work warranted publication under a real name, and that the arrangement, the anonymity, the pen name, was a constraint that served no one except the conventions that made it necessary. She stared at him. You did that without asking me. I did not know you, he said. I knew your work. They are the same thing, she said, which was what she had just been arguing and which landed on both of them with the weight of something irrefutable. Sebastian looked at her. He said nothing for a moment, then, yes, they are. It was not your decision to make. No, it was not. I have managed this for 3 years without anyone's intervention. You have, he said, and you have published under a false name for 3 years, and your work has been read and admired and discussed in drawing rooms by people who would look at you over their coffee and see nothing but a gentleman's daughter from Shropshire. A pause. I have been one of those people, I am aware of that. Harriet looked at the book on the table. Her book, green cover, battered spine, both their handwriting now in the margins, his 4 words beside her 5th ode. This one resists too. What did De Vere say, she asked, when you wrote to him? That it was a matter for the author's discretion, Sebastian said, that he would raise it when the time came. He looked at her. It appears the time has come. Because you pushed it. Because you submitted the 5th ode, he said, and it is better than anything published in that journal in the past 2 years, and it deserves a name on it. Your name. Harriet stood up, not in anger, in the specific restlessness of someone who has received too much information and needs to be vertical. She went to the window. Outside, the beaches dripped. The sky was a uniform grey that showed no intention of changing. And the other matter, she said to the window, the political one. She heard him still. George mentioned it, she said. At luncheon I was not attending, I was not trying to attend. She turned around. I understand what this house party is for. I understand what I am not. He stood now too. The room felt smaller. Harriet, he said. Her name, not Miss Calloway. Her name in that controlled voice which was the most uncontrolled thing she had heard from him. Don't, she said, not loudly. Whatever you're about to say, if it is kind, don't. I don't need it to be kind. It is true, he said. I was going to say something true. She waited. The match, he said, is a political obligation that I have been avoiding for 2 years and that my mother has been engineering for 4. The list exists. Alderton's daughter is on it. The session begins in February. He paused. None of that has changed. I know, she said. What has changed, he said, is that I sat in this library for 10 days and found out who you are, both of you together. He looked at the book on the table. And I wrote to a man I admired without a face, and I sat beside a woman I admired without a name, and they were the same person the entire time, and I was the last to know. The irony of it landed between them like something set down carefully. You are still not on any list, he said. I am aware, she said. I am telling you that the list, he said, is beginning to strike me as a document of limited authority. Harriet looked at him for a long moment. His face was precise, controlled, and offering her something she had not asked for and did not know what to do with. She picked up the book from the table. I need to think, she said. She left the room. The letter from De Vere stayed on the table. Sebastian stood in the library alone and looked at the chair where she had been sitting. George Stowe appeared in the doorway. He looked at Sebastian. He looked at the letter on the table. He said nothing, which was the most eloquent thing available. Not a word, Sebastian said. I haven't said anything, George said. You were about to. George came in, picked up the letter, read it and set it back down. H. Calloway, he said. Yes. The essays, the translations, the ones you've been sending me for months telling me to read. Yes. George was quiet for a moment. Well, he said. Indeed, said Sebastian. 3 days passed. They were civil to each other at dinner, which cost both of them something. They were not in the library at the same time, which cost more. Harriet worked in her room, the book on the desk beside her, and wrote 3 pages of the essay and crossed out 2 of them and wrote them again differently. She wrote nothing to S. Vale. There was, for the first time in 8 months, nothing she could say to him that she had not already said to his face. Louisa noticed. Louisa was not in general a woman who missed things despite appearances. She moved quickly and spoke quickly, and this was sometimes mistaken for inattention, which she had never corrected because it was useful. She noticed the library and the dinners, and the particular quality of correctness with which Harriet and Sebastian now spoke to each other, which was the correctness of 2 people maintaining a wall rather than the correctness of 2 people who were simply polite. She said nothing for 2 days, which was her limit. On the 3rd day she appeared in Harriet's room at 10:30 in the morning, sat on the bed uninvited and said, Tell me. "There is nothing to tell," Harriet said. "Harriet." Harriet set down her pen. She looked at Louisa, who looked back with the expression of a woman who had known her for 20 years and was owed better than this. She told her. Not everything, not S. Vale and H. Calloway and the 8 months of letters. That was too much, that required more explaining than she had the patience for this morning. But the shape of it, the letter, the conversation, the list that she was not on. Louisa listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to indicate that she understood the gravity. "He wrote to the journal," Louisa said when Harriet had finished. "About your work." "Without asking me." "Without asking you," Louisa agreed, "which is either very high-handed or very—" She stopped, started again. "What did he say when you told him it wasn't his decision?" "He agreed." "Just agreed?" "He said no, it was not." Louisa was quiet for a moment. "That is not what men usually say," she said. "I am aware. They usually explain why they were right to do it." "He didn't." Another silence. Louisa looked at the book on the desk, the green cover and battered spine that had been in this room since Harriet arrived. "Do you know," she said carefully, "what I think?" "I have a strong intuition," Harriet said. "I think," Louisa said with the gentleness of someone delivering something true, "that you are very angry with him for a great many reasons, some of which are entirely fair, and some of which are because you are frightened." Harriet picked up her pen. "I am not frightened." "Of course not," Louisa said. "You are the least frightened person I know, and you have been staring at the same page for 40 minutes. She stood up. "I am going downstairs. Come when you are ready." She paused at the door. "The essay is very good, Harriet. The 5th ode one. I read it when it came out. I didn't know it was you, and I thought, whoever wrote this understands something true." She left before Harriet could respond. Harriet looked at the page. The same paragraph she had been revising for the past hour looked back at her. She put the pen down. Sebastian was in the stable yard. He went there when he needed to think, which George had identified years ago and respected. The horses did not require conversation, the physical work of checking tack, speaking to the grooms, watching the animals move. It ordered things that the inside of his head sometimes did not. George found him there anyway. "She's leaving Friday," George said, leaning on the stable door with the ease of a man who had delivered difficult news before and had learned not to preface it. Sebastian continued examining the bay gelding's near foreleg. "Who told you?" "Louisa, she didn't mean to. She was explaining the dinner arrangements and said there would only be 7 on Saturday." George paused. 2 days, Carwell." "I heard you. I'm not sure you're listening." Sebastian straightened and looked at his cousin. George's face held the expression it always held in these moments. Not alarm, not judgment, but the careful attention of a man who would not tell him what to do and would also not pretend the situation was other than it was. "The list," Sebastian said. "Is a list," George said. "It is not a parliamentary act." "My mother." "Your mother," George said, "has been managing your affairs since your father died and has done it competently, and has also never, in my observation, met anyone who interested you enough to make you forget what you were reading." He let that sit. "I have watched you sit in rooms with women your mother approved of for 4 years. I have never seen you look like you have looked in that library." Sebastian looked at the horse. "It is not a simple thing." "No," George agreed. "It isn't. The political connection is real. The family expectation is real. The list is—" He paused. "The list is also a list of women who do not translate Greek in the margins of their own books and correspond with journals under false names, because society has given them no other option." He pushed off the stable door. "I am not telling you what to do." "You are doing an excellent impression of it." "I am telling you what is true," George said. "What you do with it is your own affair." He went back inside. Sebastian stood in the stable yard for a long time. The bay gelding put its head over the door and regarded him without expectation. "Quite," Sebastian said to the horse. He found her in the library. She was always in the library. He had understood this within the first 2 days and had arranged his own mornings accordingly, and had told himself at the time that this was because the library was the best room in the house, and he would have been there regardless. He no longer told himself this. She looked up when he came in. She did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for something and was now determining whether this was it. He came in. He did not take his usual chair. "I owe you an apology," he said, standing. "For the letter to De Vere, it was not my right." You have apologized, she said. I'm apologizing again. It does not require 2 apologies. The first one was not sufficient. She looked at him. What would sufficient look like? I don't know, he said, which was honest. I know what I should not have done. I am less certain about the remediation. He paused. I have written to De Vere again. I told him the matter of publication under a real name is entirely H. Calloway's decision, and that he should not act on my previous letter without her explicit instruction. Harriet was quiet for a moment. When did you write that? Yesterday. She absorbed this. And the original letter? Also withdrawn insofar as it can be. He may have already discussed it with colleagues. I cannot undo what has been discussed. I can only tell him not to act. She looked at her hands, then at the book on the table, then at him. Why? Because it was not my decision, he said, and I was wrong to make it, and being right about your work does not make me right about your choices. The room was very still. That is a more nuanced understanding than I expected, she said. I have had 3 days, he said. I think quickly when the situation warrants it. She almost smiled. He saw it, the corner of her mouth, the small pull of it, and felt something in his chest that he was thoroughly tired of not naming. George tells me you are leaving Friday, he said. Saturday, actually, she said. Louisa miscounted. 1 additional day. 1 additional day. He sat down then in his chair. The correct one this time, the one by the window, 12 feet from hers. He looked at her directly. I want to tell you something, and I need you not to interrupt until I have finished, because I will not say it well, and the attempt may take longer than it ought. Harriet set down her pen. I am listening. The match, he said. The list. My mother's preference and the political obligation and all the rest of it. These are real things. I am not dismissing them. I have obligations that exist whether I find them convenient or not, and I am not a man who discards obligations because they become inconvenient. He paused. But I have spent 8 months writing to a mind I respected without reservation, and 10 days sitting across a room from a woman who has not once deferred to me when she thought I was wrong, and the experience of those 2 things being the same person is— He stopped, started again. I'm trying to say that the list was made before I knew what I was looking for, and that what I was looking for was already writing to me. Harriet looked at him for a long moment. That is, she said, the most precisely constructed romantic declaration I have encountered. I am not a man who does things imprecisely. I had noticed. She was quiet then. And the list? I have written to my mother, he said. I told her I require more time. She will not be pleased. That is not an answer. No, he said. It is the beginning of one. He looked at her steadily. I am asking you not to leave on Saturday with the assumption that this conversation is concluded. She looked at the book on the table. She looked at the window, the dripping beaches, the grey sky that had not changed in a fortnight. She looked at him. I will not leave, she said, with that assumption. Good, he said. I have conditions, she said. I expected you would. The writing continues. The journal continues. If I publish under a real name, it is because I decide it, not because you advocate for it to De Vere without my knowledge. Agreed. You do not manage my correspondence. I had no intention of managing your correspondence. You have a history of acting on it, she said. I have a history, he said carefully, of acting on things I feel strongly about before consulting the people most affected. I am aware this is a failing. I am working on it. Harriet looked at him for a long moment. Are you? She said. No, he said, but I am willing to try, which in my experience amounts to the same thing. This time she did smile. Brief, real, the kind that had no performance in it. I need more time, she said. Not for the feelings. Those are sufficiently clear, and I see no use in pretending otherwise. For the practicalities. What marriage to a duke would mean for what I do and who I am. Take the time, he said. I will still be here. You may, she said, also still be on the list. That, he said, is a problem for February. The last dinner of the house party was on Friday evening. Louisa, who had organized everything else, appeared to have organized this one toward a particular end. She placed Harriet and Sebastian beside each other at table for the first time. This was either obliviousness or precision. Harriet, who knew Louisa, understood it was the latter. They talked. Not carefully, not in the calibrated register of the past fortnight, but with the ease of people who had stopped performing ignorance. He told her what he remembered of his tutor's method. She told him about her father's library, the years of reading everything available because available was all there was. The Greek verse volume found in a lot of unsorted books purchased from an estate sale when she was 17. "You have had it since you were 17, he said. "It was my first serious translation project," she said. "I was terrible at it. The marginalia don't suggest someone who was terrible at it. The early pages are not annotated," she said. "I knew enough even then to be embarrassed by my first attempts." He looked at her. "Show me." "They are very bad." "I would like to see them regardless." She considered. Then she picked up the book from beside her plate. She had brought it to dinner, as she brought it everywhere, which several of the other guests had noticed and none had commented on, and opened to the first pages. The marginalia there were a younger hand, uncertain, occasionally wrong, reaching for precision she didn't yet have. She watched him read them. "These are not bad," he said. "You are being kind." "I am not kind," he said mildly. "I am accurate. The instinct was there from the beginning. The technique came after." She took the book back, looked at those early pages herself, the handwriting of a 17-year-old who had found something she was going to spend her life on and did not yet know it. "It was yours before it was mine," she said, "in a sense." "I read you before I met you," he said. "That is the correct order." The conversation around them continued. The wine was poured. Louisa, across the table, caught Harriet's eye and looked immediately elsewhere, which was the least subtle display of tact Harriet had ever witnessed. She did not leave on Saturday. She had intended to. Her trunk was half packed and the carriage had been arranged. Then it rained again, a serious, committed rain, the kind Derbyshire produced as a point of local pride, and Mr. Fenwick mentioned with genuine regret that the lower road was already flooding and the upper road had been unreliable since Tuesday. "You must stay," Louisa said, with the expression of a woman for whom the weather had delivered something she had been hoping for. "I appear to have no choice," Harriet said. "None whatsoever," Louisa said cheerfully and went to inform the household. Harriet took her half-packed trunk and unpacked it, and set the Greek verse volume back on the desk and went downstairs. Sebastian was in the entrance hall reading a letter. He looked up when she appeared on the stairs. "The road," she said. "Yes," he said, "I heard. How long do you think?" "George rode out to look at it this morning. He said 2 days at minimum." "2 days," she said. "At minimum," he said. They looked at each other at the bottom of the stairs, in the entrance hall, in the grey morning light, and the situation was so straightforwardly comic that Harriet laughed, actually laughed, not the polite version, and after a moment he did too. It was a small sound, controlled even in its abandon, and she filed it away as the most revealing thing she had heard him produce. "The library," she said. "The library," he agreed. They were there all morning. Not working, or not only. The books were open, the notes were made, but the conversation that had been dammed and redirected and managed for the past fortnight was now apparently done being managed. He told her about the dukedom, not the political performance of it, but the weight of it, the inheritance of a title and lands and obligations from a father who had died when Sebastian was 24 and left him, in his own words, with the distinct impression that he had been handed a very large and complicated object without instructions. She told him about the essays, the first one published 4 years ago, the terror and the exhilaration of seeing H. Calloway in print for the first time, the system of correspondence through her father's direction that had kept the identity contained. "Were you never tempted," he said, "to tell someone?" "I told Louisa," she said. "After the 3rd essay, she is the only person. And she was very excited, and then she forgot about it and asked me what I thought of her new curtains," Harriet said, "which was, in its way, exactly what I needed." He looked at her with that expression she had learned in the fortnight, not quite a smile, the thing that lived just before a smile. "I have written to my mother again," he said. "Since yesterday." She wrote back, "She is displeased." "You told her." "I told her I had met someone who I intended to know better before the question of February could be settled. I did not tell her who." Harriet was quiet. "And Alderton's daughter?" "My mother's preference," he said. "Not a settled arrangement. She has been presented as the obvious candidate. I have not agreed to anything." He looked at his hands, then at her. "I am telling you this not to offer you a resolution, because I have none yet. I am telling you because you asked for time and I told you to take it, and you deserve to know that I am not taking none myself." "That is," she said, "unusually equitable." "I am trying," he said, to be the kind of man who consults the people most affected. She looked at him. "How is it going?" "Early days," he said. Outside the rain intensified. Inside the fire was well built and the candles were lit against the grey. The library smelled of wood smoke and old books and the particular quality of a day that was not going anywhere. He proposed on Monday morning. She had not expected Monday morning. She had thought vaguely that there would be more time, more days, more negotiation of terms, more careful triangulation of the distance between what was possible and what was wanted. She had been composing arguments. She had a list. He came into the library at 9, sat down across from her and said, "I have withdrawn from the understanding with Alderton." She looked up from her notebook. "You have." "I wrote to my mother yesterday evening. I told her the matter was settled and the settlement was not Alderton's daughter." He paused. "She will require management. I am practiced at it." "When did you decide this?" "Friday evening," he said. "At dinner, when you showed me the early marginalia." He looked at the book on the table. "I thought the instinct was there from the beginning, before the technique. That is either the most important thing about a person, or it is nothing. I decided it was the most important thing." Harriet looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very oblique way to arrive at a proposal." "I am getting to it," he said. "Please do." He met her eyes directly. "I'm asking you to marry me. Not because you are on a list, you are not, and I have burned the list, but because I have spent 8 months corresponding with the best mind I have encountered in my adult life, and 10 days discovering that it belongs to a woman who will argue with my annotations, publish under her own name the moment she decides to, and laugh at me when the situation warrants it." He paused. "I find all of these things to be conditions of happiness, rather than obstacles to it." The room was very still. "There is the question," Harriet said carefully, "of what marriage to you would actually mean." "Ask it," he said, specifically. The writing continues. "Yes. The journal, the submissions, whatever name I decide to put on the work, that is my decision." "Yes. You do not write letters to De Vere on my behalf without asking me first." "I have already agreed to this." "I am repeating it," she said, "because it needs to be in the spoken record as well as the implied one." "Harriet Calloway," he said with a patience that was not quite patience but was choosing to look like it, "I agree. Your work is yours. Your decisions about it are yours. I would like to read it before it is published because I believe I am your best reader, and I would like to argue with it before the world does, but I will not act on it without your knowledge." She was quiet for a moment. "That is," she said, "the most reasonable thing you have said in a fortnight. I have been building to it." She looked at him. His face was its usual controlled self, and under that control she could now read, as she had learned to read in 10 days of proximity, what was actually there. Not composure in the absence of feeling, composure in the management of a great deal of it. She kissed him. She had not entirely planned this, or she had planned it in the abstract, the way one plans a thing that seems inevitable, without quite believing it will arrive. But he was sitting across the table from her with that expression, and the book was between them and the fire was lit, and she had been arguing with him in margins and letters and across dinner tables for 10 days and 8 months respectively, and enough was enough. He was still for one startled second, then he was not still at all. He kissed her back with the focused thoroughness of a man who, when he decided to do something, did it completely, and the composure he had maintained for the entire fortnight was entirely, comprehensively gone. She felt him reach for it and not bother. When they stopped, they were both quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." "You kissed me first," he said. "I was answering the question," she said. "I answer in the mode that seems most efficient." He looked at her, the almost smile, but larger this time, actually present, actually visible. "I have been waiting," he said, "for months for someone to argue with who would also do that." "The two are not usually combined," she said. "No," he said, "they are not." He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. "I will write to my mother today. She will be displeased." "She will recover," he said. "She is resilient, and I am her only son, and she will eventually prefer a daughter-in-law who reads Greek to no daughter-in-law at all." That is an optimistic reading of the situation. "I am occasionally optimistic," he said. "It doesn't last." They were married in December. The ceremony was small, the church in the village nearest Fenwick Park, which Harriet had chosen because it was pretty, and because Louisa, who organised everything given the opportunity, was more manageable at close range. Mr. Fenwick gave a short speech at the wedding breakfast that was heartfelt and slightly misattributed two of the facts, and Louisa cried, which she had promised she would not do and did not try very hard to prevent. George Stowe stood up with Sebastian and said precisely one word to Harriet before the ceremony, which was, "Good." She had found this, on balance, the most satisfying endorsement available. Harriet wore her good dress and no gloves. Someone at the wedding breakfast, a connection of Sebastian's she had not met before, a woman of 60 with the expression of a person who had attended many such events and formed views on all of them, looked at Harriet's bare hands and then at Sebastian and said with the bright precision of genuine astonishment, "This is rather unexpected, Carwell." "Yes," Harriet said pleasantly, "I think so too." The woman opened her mouth, closed it and turned to speak to George. Sebastian beside Harriet did not smile. He looked directly ahead with the expression of a man exercising significant self-control, and she felt his hand find hers under the table and hold it. The house in London was very large. Harriet had known this in the abstract. She had not quite prepared for the specific reality of a house that contained, among other things, 2 libraries, one official for receiving, and one private, at the back of the second floor, which Sebastian had been using as a study for years and which, she discovered on her 3rd day, had better light than the official one and a window seat that looked over the garden. She claimed it. He found her there on the 4th morning with her notebook and the Greek verse volume and a cup of tea. She had apparently transported from the breakfast room without assistance, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. "This is your study," she said. "It was," he said. "I can work elsewhere." "You can," he said, and came in and sat at the desk. He had papers. She had her notebook. The window let in the thin December light, and the garden below was bare and frost-edged and the colour of pewter. They worked in silence for an hour. It was not the silence of 2 people ignoring each other. It had never been that. The March issue of the Quarterly Review arrived on a Tuesday. Sebastian brought it up from the Morning Post and set it on the desk without comment. She was at the window seat. He sat across from her. She opened it, found the page. "The 5th Ode, Translation and Interpretation," it said, and beneath the title, in the same print as the title, in the same weight and size, as if it were simply a fact like any other fact, by Harriet Calloway. Not H. Calloway, not a false name, not a half-name, not a set of initials that could belong to anyone. Her name, her full name, the one that now carried a title society would notice, and a scandal it would not quickly forgive. She had known this when she wrote to Davia 3 weeks ago. She had known it when she signed the letter. She had told Sebastian the night before she sent it, which was the correct order of things, and he had said nothing for a moment and then said, "Davia will print it." And she had said, "I know." And that had been the entirety of the discussion, which was also the correct length. Harriet Calloway. She read the first paragraph, then she looked up. Sebastian was watching her. He had not opened his own letters. He had been watching her read. "Well," he said. She looked down at her name on the page, then at the book on the desk between them. The Greek verse volume, green cover, battered spine, its margins now so full of 2 different handwritings that there was almost no white space left. His notes in the careful, controlled hand, hers in the hand she used when she was thinking. "It's right," she said, "the translation. It's the closest I've gotten." "I know," he said. "I read it." "You argued with the 2nd stanza." "The 2nd stanza has a problem." "The 2nd stanza is fine," she said. "We will disagree about the 2nd stanza," he said, "for the foreseeable future." "Yes," she said, "we will." She looked at her name again, turned the page, began to read. He picked up his letters. Outside the window, the frost had begun to lift. The garden below was still bare, still pewter grey, but the light had changed, the particular shift of a December morning deciding, after consideration, to become an afternoon. She noticed it and did not remark on it. She finished reading. She set the journal down. She picked up her pen, opened the notebook to a fresh page, and wrote the first line of the next essay.